finally, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio is presented by DSI Sportsbook. If you go over to DSI, use the promo code BTB and the number 25, you get a $25 free bet just for signing up, 100% deposit bonus for the sportsbook, and 100% deposit bonus for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. 2 segments coming your way here today. The first, our Westgate SuperContest Selection segment with myself and Sports Cheetah, recapping an ugly week that was in Week 7 and looking ahead to hopefully a good week for all of us here in Week 8. So without further ado, here is that SuperContest Selection segment with myself and Sports Cheetah. All right, well, let's get into the Super Contest stuff here. And Week 7 was pretty much a disaster for a lot of people here in the Super Contest. My Bang the Book podcast entry went 2-3. I'm now 19-16 on the year. It's actually pretty good, tied for 418th place here out of the 2,748 entries that there are in the Super Contest. Our BangTheBook.com entry, my boss's entry, 4-0-1 last week. Huge week there, 21-13-1 overall. 21.5 points is a tie for 79th place. But Cheetah last week, 4,344 winners, 8,482 losers, 809 pushes, 33.87%. The top 11 consensus picks in the traditional Super Contest all lost. The 12th one pushed. Now 46.66% overall. But if you think that's bad, the Super Contest Gold went 136, 292, and 37, 31.78%. Gold had 5 straight weeks above 50% until last week. Now below 50% on the year, 49.03%. Just one of those weeks, huh, man?
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic for anyone that did better than 2-3, right? Or even 2-3 doesn't feel as bad as it could any other week. So you guys, obviously the 4-0-1 on your site entry is great. Like, I mean, that's like, that feels like it's worth 5 points, even though you only got 4.5 or maybe 5.5 points. You know, it's pretty good. And even your 2-3, I feel like it doesn't feel too bad when you know everyone else is losing their top picks and only hit 1 out of 3. So not in a bad spot to be in. You know, you're still around, still hanging in there. I'm in the same boat. I went 3-2, so it feels like, you know, I'll take it. It was a good week in that sense compared to everyone else where you probably made some ground versus the majority.
Well, and what was really interesting is that a couple of weeks ago we saw the barking dogs, and there were a lot of dogs that did very, very well. Last week it was back to being a favorites week. So, you know, I'm kind of curious to see what happens here this week. I mean, we've kind of had a little bit of extremes here in terms of the underdogs doing very well in Week 6, the favorites doing very well in Week 7. And, of course, I think 8 of the top 11 in the regular Super Contest were underdogs, and the 3 favorites that were in there didn't cover either. So, you know, it was just one of those situations where everybody had a bad week for the most part. I mean, like you said, you know, if you went 4-0-1, 4-1, 5-0, I mean, it's very significant, really helped you gain some ground here. But, Cheetah, one thing I do want to talk about is as we start looking into Week 8 here, you know, we talk about it all the time. Playing the Thursday night game, very, very difficult, especially this week. Long injury report for Baltimore, quarterback change for the Dolphins, which I think is an upgrade, but we'll see how it plays out. But we've got 6 teams on a bye, so that already brings us down to 13 games. If you cross off the Thursday nighter, you're down to 12. You've got a big favorite out in London. You've got 2 double-digit favorites on the board. You've got another one that's fairly close with the New Orleans Saints. It's one of those weeks where finding 5 games is really, really challenging to do.
Yeah, it really is. I've only bet 2 myself. One of them we'll probably talk about here later on the show, and the other one is the Thursday night game. I only bet it smaller because, you know, despite the injury report, I think Baltimore should be higher. And I actually think Matt Moore is a better fit for, you know, the Miami offense than Jay Cutler is. But I bet those smaller. So there's really only 2 games I like enough to put money on it. And, you know, maybe something happens in the meantime where I find a third game, or there may be a total that gets in range that I'm eyeing by Sunday. But I don't anticipate having much this week. And so it makes it tough when you're forced, obviously, to pick 5 games, and not only 5 games but 5 sides. And like you mentioned, you're only, you know, with an option of 12, and a couple of them are some pretty big favorites. And so, I mean, it's one that I think it's a week in the middle of the season which can kind of turn, you know, your entry around, so to speak, where, especially off of last week, you know, if you're able to now on an ugly card go 4-1 or 5-0 and get a little momentum, and then you go into a card next week that maybe you actually like, it can just get you in the right direction and get some momentum going, while everyone else kind of is struggling with this card too. From anyone I've talked to, no one really loves love much about it. So I think it's another week if you can pull out a 4-1 or 5-0, it's going to be making up a ton of ground versus everybody else.
Well, and we talk about this a lot. We talk about the game theory elements of the Super Contest. We have 6 games with hooks on them. That's the half point. And then when it comes to the flat games that we have, 2 of them are +7, 2 of them are +3, right there on those key numbers. So this is probably one of those weeks, Cheetah, where you mentioned having difficulty trying to find 5 games. Some game theory may come into play here in terms of just playing those games with the half points or the half-point spreads and hoping that you grab a winner instead of a push on another game.
Yeah, and I've talked about that before where, especially if you're trying to make up ground, so you're 5, 6, 7 points back from first. I'm not sure where first actually is at currently, but I would avoid if I can help it. At least if it comes down to picking 4th and 5th games and say you have 3 or 4 options, I would just, if you can, automatically eliminate ones where you can push. Especially, the ones that are 3s and 7s. And the problem is, I think if I had to pick another game outside of the 2 that I've bet money on that I like, the Patriots at only -7 is actually short. It's gone up to 7.5, and the market just about everywhere. And that's one I may have to end up using just because I think it's my 3rd favorite play of the whole set. But I probably won't be using Steelers Lions at 3. Or even the other 7 in Chiefs Broncos. I'll be looking at some uglier ones like Bengals Colts or Seahawks Texans that just have, the half point. You're for sure getting 1 point or 0 rather than giving, the gambling guys a chance to only give you a half point on a push.
All right, well, as we head into Week 8 here, you mentioned not being sure what the top score is. The top score right now, 25 points, and there's an 8-way tie in the traditional Super Contest with 25 points. And you kind of see that last week where some of the front runners had bad weeks. Some of the people chasing them down had good weeks. So everything kind of balanced out there a little bit. And now you're at 25 points for the leader. In the gold, BKSF leading by 4 points with 26. So some ground to catch up on there in the gold Super Contest. One other thing that we've been tracking a little bit here, games with consensus differences between the traditional and the gold, now 22 and 15 on the gold side. I believe they went 2-1 last week, so still a fairly decent trend for those that are following the Super Contest to try and get some sort of betting information out of it without having an actual entry in the contest. We'll go ahead and look at some of the games that I'm looking at here for Week 8, and we'll start with the Minnesota Vikings. They're in London to take on the Cleveland Browns. Vikings 9.5-point favorites here in this one. This is one of those games I talked about where it's very challenging to take a favorite of this magnitude out in London where some different things can happen. It's obviously a unique venue for both teams, this game being played at Twickenham Stadium where we saw the playing surface be a little bit slick last week. But there are a few things that I like about this game in terms of laying the big price with the Vikings. For one thing, they left Thursday night. The Vikings left Wednesday night, got there Thursday morning. Browns leaving Thursday night. They're getting there Friday morning. So not much of a turnaround there for the Browns, who are obviously winless on the season. And I'm a little bit worried about that as well. When you're an 0-7 team, obviously the longer you're winless, the more it kind of weighs on you. But taking that burden to London, seems like something that's not really going to be a very advantageous spot for them. No Joe Thomas for the first time in his NFL career. Looks like Myles Garrett probably not going to play in concussion protocol. Jamie Collins, Jamar Taylor, Devin McCourty, and then Jabril Peppers, all questionable here for this one. So the Browns with a lot of concerns there in the back 7. And then, of course, they don't even know who the hell the quarterback's going to be. It's going to be DeShone Kizer, but who knows how long he'll be able to be effective here in this game, especially against a really, really good Minnesota defense. Now, last week I went against the Browns. It was a loser because the Titans got stopped on the goal line. Otherwise, they would have been able to cover that number. But it felt like last week, Preston, was about as good of a game as the Browns could play. They covered the number, but they still couldn't get that victory. Seems like something that could have kind of a hangover effect in a unique spot like this.
Yeah, it totally can. I used them and bet them last week at 5.5, and I thought they were going to find a way not to cover just because they had tried in every which way to throw interceptions in the red zone like they've been doing. They ended up only losing by 3. The other thing is they were down 3. I think why I thought I was going to lose the 5.5 is they were down 3 and kicked a 54-yarder at the end to actually force overtime, and it felt like the Titans were going to win with a touchdown. But they hang on. But the problem is they fought an overtime game of a field goal contest that they couldn't win at home, which was basically their winnable game left for the next month or so. On the road at Detroit's probably a loss. Jaguars, their defense is way too tough. At Cincy, at San Diego. I mean, that was their game, and obviously then this Vikings one here coming up this weekend. It definitely feels super flat now, and they have a ton of injuries. The Thomas one's going to be massive, especially with a young quarterback. It's not generally one I would look at using, obviously, a 9.5-point favorite here in the contest with the Vikings on, a big favorite in London where anything can happen. But I thought you brought up a ton of good points, and for me, it's definitely Minnesota or Cleveland. You can't go back to the wall of Cleveland here. I think if you used them last week, just pocket it and accept that you may have gotten kind of lucky the fact that they did end up covering and they didn't win, and it's not one that I think I'm going to be diving back and using again for a while just because I think the team could totally derail at this point. And while we're talking Minnesota, ever since they made the decision to just not rush Sam Bradford back and use Keenum, I think it was in the Bears game, they came back and won that one. They beat the Packers. They beat the Ravens pretty well last week, too. I mean, they're rolling right along. Their defense is still one of the best in the league. And obviously we're talking about a Browns team that can't really move the ball, score, throw too many interceptions. It just sets up really nicely for the Vikings to roll. Assuming they're focused in London and everything's set there, which I think you have to just expect and go into it expecting. And the fact that they're there a day early helps, and it seems like they are focused and they're in this obviously to make a run here at not only the division but the NFC title.
Well, the Browns never played in London, so this is a new thing for them. The Vikings were there, I think it was in 2013, so obviously there's been a lot of turnover and, of course, a new coaching staff as well, so it's still a fairly new thing to them, but still, I mean, they have been there. They have gone through the process a little bit before, at least as an organization, so they have a little bit better of an idea on what to expect. And again, I think schematically here, too, with the Browns playing their safeties so far off the line of scrimmage, they've done a very, very good job of stopping the run. That's largely been with the front seven. But the Minnesota offense, the way that they, kind of throw swing passes and things of that sort, the safeties are going to have to cover a lot of ground running up 10, 12 yards to try and cut down those swing passes and short throws. And I just think that, the Minnesota is going to move the ball in chunks here. Obviously, I'm going to have to keep a close eye on the weather forecast as we get closer, and that is my usual disclaimer here, is that things can change. I won't go and play the Browns, but I may not play the Vikings. I won't play the other side of a game that I talk about here on the show, barring some sort of weird quarterback injury or whatever the case may be. But weather could be a factor here, because if you're talking about a team trying to cover 9.5 in London, well, the weather kind of has to cooperate there as well. Speaking of weather, that's a big factor here. And the other game, or one of the other games I'm looking at, that's number 8, the New York Jets, who are plus 4.5 against the Atlanta Falcons. And bad weather expected for this game. Heavy rain and wind, perhaps up to an inch of rain during the game here, at least on the look-ahead forecast as of Thursday evening. Winds in the 15 to 20 mile per hour range. Not a great thing for a dome quarterback like Matt Ryan, especially with all the problems that this offense is having with Steve Sarkisian. Jets really believing in themselves. They're not as good as their record would indicate, but they really haven't shown us any reason to back off of them here lately. They played right with the Dolphins last week, pushed that number, maybe could have beaten the Patriots a couple of weeks ago, had the 3 wins prior to that. But really, for me, this is a fade of the Falcons and a fade of Matt Ryan in the weather, catching north of a key number there with the 4.5.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because last week everybody was betting the Falcons. I'm pretty sure they were the consensus in the actual Super Contest, but outside of that, just in real life, I mean, they were getting so many public percentage of the splits of actual bets on their side. The number came all the way down to 2.5, which I finally had to put a little bit of money on the Pats just out of principle. It felt like minus 2.5, and then Atlanta never really showed. I'm not sure if it's a combination of, like you're mentioning, with just the offense being out of sync and Sark at offensive coordinator, or if it's the Pats defense finally waking up from their nap early on in the year. It's probably a little of both. The one thing that was strange is Matt Ryan missed a couple throws for touchdowns early in the game. He was just really off on top of the fact that they weren't moving the ball very in rhythm from start to finish. So I'm not sure 23-0, and they end up scoring right at the end, 23-7. They're a better team than that, but it's really tough to back them right now. And on the flip side, you have a Jets side that feels like they just keep covering, and they're getting a point or two of value at home. All these spots. I know I backed them twice so far this year in the contest. One was the Jacksonville game where I actually bet money on them as home dogs, and they've just outplayed a lot of teams, to an extent that no one expected coming into the year. So I think if I had to pick a side in the game, I'm with you. I would use the Jets at the 4.5 or there's 5.5 here in town. If you're looking to bet, you live in Vegas or have an ounce here, I think that's another point. It's only a 5, but it can make a difference. And I'm not sure. The thing that would probably keeps me away from using this game is that everyone's hitting Atlanta last week, and they all failed miserably, and no one's going to look to play Atlanta this week. And probably, if anything, it'll be the Jets. And it feels like maybe now Matt Ryan wakes up, has his 4-touchdown game, and they win 28, 21, or 20 or something, and they cover. So I don't know. It kind of feels like if there is a bounce-back spot for Atlanta at all, and I think at this point they're actually an underdog to make the playoffs. This is a pretty big kind of must-win for Atlanta when it's all said and done. So for me, I probably respect Matt Ryan enough that they're going to find a way to get a win, and then at that point, are they covering 4.5? Probably a good percentage of that time. I'll have to stay back, but technically, I think you're on the right side as far as the numbers perspective goes. My number is 3.5, and so there's a little bit of value there.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying too, specifically about Matt Ryan, and he is a guy that's too good to be doing this, and eventually his talent is going to overcome the problems that they have there at offensive coordinator. If the weather forecast was different, if it was going to be 60 and clear or 55 and clear or something like that, I wouldn't be on the Jets here in this spot, I don't think, because of exactly what you talked about, that I'd be concerned about Matt Ryan, having that game. And look, statistically, the Falcons are the side. They're plus 1.1 yards per play this year, even with how this offense has looked. 6.2 yards per play, 5.1 yards per play against. Now, they haven't forced a whole lot of turnovers, which has been a big problem for their defense. They've made it harder on the offense. And when I look at the Jets, they turn the football over quite a bit. Josh McCown throws some interceptions, but also they've got a good ground game here to keep the ball away from the Falcons. If this becomes an ugly, messy, muddy defensive struggle, which is what the forecast is suggesting it's going to be, then I'm happy to take the 4.5 with the Jets there in what should be a relatively low-scoring game. So it is a play that I do like quite a bit, and again, one that I'll keep a closer eye on here with regards to the weather forecast as we get closer. Next game that I really like that should be making my card here is the San Francisco 49ers. They're plus 12.5, making yet another cross-country trip to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, this is a spot where I had circled in my mind to go against the 49ers because situationally, it's pretty bad. It's their 4th road game in 5 weeks. They played a full overtime period against Arizona, full overtime period against Indianapolis, at Washington. Then they got blown out by Dallas last week. Now they're back on the road here again. Like I said, 4th road game in 5 weeks and the 3rd early kick in that span. However, because they got blown out so badly last week by Dallas, losing that game by 30, I think the light is back on to buy San Francisco. Philadelphia, to me, looks like a little bit of a paper tiger here at 6-1. They're just plus 0.2 yards per play. So I think regression is coming for this Eagles team. And like I said, when you get embarrassed like that, I think the 49ers bring their lunch pails. They go back to work here this week. Kyle Shanahan has another week to get C.J. Beathard prepared, change some protections. They ran into a pretty good Dallas team off a bye that had underachieved so far this year. And I think the 49ers can keep this one close, much like they were doing before last week's blowout.
Yeah, every game before the Dallas game, if I recall, they were 0-5 and had lost by a total of like 12 points or 13 points or something like that. So they'd been inside the number a ton and almost won so many games. And then Dallas was kind of their emotional letdown or something. Plus, Dallas was prepared. They had 2 weeks off the Green Bay loss at the buzzer. So my number, technically, if you're breaking it all down, my numbers, Philadelphia has been so good. My number's 14, so I don't necessarily think that, at the current, it's 13 in the market. I'm going to pull up real quick, make sure. It's 12.5, I guess, in the contest. So you're taking a number, I guess it's a little bit bad, taking a 12.5 when it's 13 everywhere and pushing 14 potentially. But I don't think it's funny because I keep saying I don't think I can back any of these sides. And then when it comes down to it, I'm going to end up having to use 1 or 2 of these games that we're going to discuss because I need a 4th or a 5th. I'll say this. Carson Wentz, he went out. He was on a mission against Washington, and usually when everyone's hyping someone as much as the Philadelphia Eagles and Wentz are now being hyped this week off the end of the Monday night game, if I recall correctly. So usually you just fade that blindly and you're good. I wish it wasn't an ugly team like the Niners, who just lost by 30, and their starting quarterbacks, C.J. Beathard, who only started one game and couldn't even score. Actually, I think they did end up scoring at the end. They finally got in the end zone. So I'll give them that. They did score a touchdown against Dallas at the end, but it's tough. I'll say, technically, I think you're right. This is you have to fade more than anything than back in San Francisco, but I think it's just a spot where the perception on the Eagles, and like you said, they're not necessarily outgaining opponents per play as nearly as much as a 6-1 team would show, or their point differential would show. And I think the number is a little high in that sense. But when you actually incorporate how bad San Francisco has been, and they kind of ran really good in those 5 games where they were around. My number actually has it up near 14. It's like a 13.7. So for me, it's a tough one to play. If anything, I maybe look at the total. There's a side of the total that I like, and I might release later this week. But I don't think I'm going to end up touching the side. It's a tough one, and I'll give you credit and I'll root for you just because I have no dog in the fight.
Well, and I think part of it, too, here is that you've got Philadelphia on a short week coming off that Redskins win. And what that Redskins win does for them is it gives them a 2.5-game cushion here in the NFC East. They're already 3-0 against divisional opponents. So this also feels like kind of a flat spot, a little bit of a letdown spot. You've got this winless San Francisco team coming east to you. You got to take on the Denver defense the following week at home. So maybe a little bit of a look ahead, maybe a little bit of a flat spot, a letdown spot. If Philadelphia goes out here and covers this double-digit number, I'll start to reevaluate my thoughts on the Eagles. And at that point, who knows, I may be a little bit too late with it. But like I said, just 0.2 yards per play to the good here, 5.7 to 5.5. It just looks to me like Philadelphia is a team that is in line for a little bit of regression here. And I think that this could be the week when you've got this 49ers team, trying to erase the bad memory of getting blown out last week. So I'm going to take the 49ers here. I'm going to take what I perceive to be, both some situational line value and also some line value on the concept there that I think Philadelphia is going to regress a little bit. Now, those are the 3 plays I do really like here for the card, but obviously I've got to come up with 2 more. I've got 3 leans for you here on the show, and I should be using 2 of these. I don't know why I would deviate from that because there just aren't a whole lot of games I really love here this week. But one of the games I'm looking at, and this is a really, really tough one, but it's number 5 on the SuperContest rotation order, the New Orleans Saints. They're a 9-point favorite at home against the Chicago Bears. Now, what makes this so hard is that this Bears defense has been exceptional. They've been very, very good under Vic Fangio, especially with how incompetent the offense has been all year long. The Saints do have problems stopping the run. I think they've given up 4.7 yards per carry. We know what Chicago wants to do to move the football. So if the Saints sell out against the run, can they stop it? That's the question I'm thinking of here defensively for New Orleans. But look, it's Drew Brees. I mean, Drew Brees is going to get his. He's going to move the football. He's going to get some points. Can Chicago keep pace with that? And also, can this Bears defense keep up with the progress that it's been making when played a really good quarterback since they played Green Bay back in week 4? So, they played the Vikings, and Case Keenum's been fine, but, he is what he is. They played Baltimore. Joe Flacco's been a mess this year. And then Carolina last week had 5 first downs and 153 yards, so they just went in the tank. So I'm kind of looking at this and wondering, if maybe this Bears defense is just playing over its head a little bit.
It's definitely an upgrade. I mean, similar even to going back to that last game real quick with the Eagles. I mean, they haven't actually really played anybody. They beat the Giants by 3, the Chargers by 2, the Panthers by 5, and they beat the Redskins twice. And I think they beat the Cardinals. And, then the one team they've played that's going to be a playoff team is the Chiefs, and they lost that game. So similarly here, you're looking at the Bears defense specifically, and they haven't really played any playoff teams. And maybe the Packers or the Panthers find a way, but probably not. And this is definitely a big jump as far as the talent that they've seen, and especially under center with Drew Brees. The number for me is good. I have it at 9. That's right where it is basically across the board. And I know in the contest it's 9 flat as well. 9's not one where you need to be worried about pushing very often. So I think it's a good one to use versus say like Steelers Lions, which is a 3, because you're very unlikely to push on a 9. So I think if you do have a lean that way for your 4th or 5th game, then it's one that's worth using versus some of the other options. I will say this, and I didn't watch the Panthers-Bears game. I didn't have any action on it at all, but they only got 3 points on offense themselves. I believe they're 17. It was 2 pick sixes. And so I'd be really concerned, it's the Saints. Yeah, like you said, the Saints defense is pretty bad. And we all know that if they sell out for the run, it comes down to that. Can Mr. Trubisky throw the ball? And he couldn't against Carolina, from what I gather from box score and, the final score there at 17-3. So if the Saints play a similar formula and Breeze can just not throw pick sixes, it is one that they should pull away from, as the game goes along. So if I was to pick a side, I think I'm with you on this one too, as far as the way I'm leaning there with the Saints. And it's one, I think the total's moved a ton already. For what it's worth, 50 down to like 47.5. Pretty big move for early in the week, and maybe it moves down more. But I think it's one that's the right move is what I was going to get out of it. I think it turns into, if the Saints are the right side, it's because Chicago's not going to be able to really get the ball going. And if you can't get the ball going against the Saints, defense, then that's an issue, and they're going to get theirs. Like you said, Drew Brees can hit 20 to 24, and at that point they're going to, be in range to cover, in that 20 to 4, maybe even more points to get it done. So I think it's Saints or nothing. Nothing really to worry about as far as injuries go. I think either way, it's a pretty clean injury report on both sides there.
Well, and of course, you could make a devil's advocate point and point out the fact that the Saints gave up 181 rushing yards last week to Green Bay when it was Brett Hundley, and they should have been selling out against the run in that game as well. So just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, and again, that's something that I recommend. Not everybody does it, but I recommend looking at all sides of the equation. Go ahead.
Yeah, they did. The first drive was 90 yards, touchdown, all run plays. That was half of them. And Green Bay was up 7-0. And then I know, 50 more yards were Hundley's like scramble / run plays. And they sold out. And after a 14-7, Green Bay only got 3 more points for like 2.5 quarters. So it worked against Green Bay. Hundley ended up only going like 12 of 24 and threw for 83 yards or something. It actually definitely was what the Saints did. For some reason, they didn't do it to start the game, but they made the adjustment a quarter and a half in, and it panned out. So maybe going into this, they're just going to be like, hey, our defense was really good. We played 8 in the box a lot of the time. Let's do the same thing here against Chicago. And if not, at the very least, if they play a little more lax early against the run and they're getting bit, they're good enough to make the adjustments because they just did it last week against Green Bay, and it brought them back in the game. They ultimately won.
No, that's an excellent point. That's why it matters so much to dig into the box scores a little bit more, look at some of those drive logs, because you're absolutely right. That is something I overlooked, and it's something that honestly does make me feel better about the Saints here, who also, by the way, have found a running game of their own. 193 rushing yards 2 weeks ago against Detroit, 161 last week against Green Bay. A balanced offense with Drew Brees at the helm, pretty terrifying here, and I'm not sure how well the Bears can stack up against that. Another game that's on my leans list here, and this is one that's kind of challenging to look at. I had this one in picks at first, and then I thought to myself, well, I don't know for sure. So I moved it down to the leans section, but that's number 19, the Seattle Seahawks. They're a 5.5-point favorite here against the Houston Texans. Now, the Texans are off of a bye. There's a lot of hype, a lot of buzz for Deshaun Watson, who's got a very good shot at winning the Rookie of the Year here as long as he stays healthy. And I'm kind of looking at here a little bit in this spot is that I almost feel like this is a little bit of a contrarian type of play because the Seahawks, people just, for whatever reason, don't seem to be believing in them a whole lot here so far this season. The Giants were the number 3 consensus pick in the SuperContest Gold last week against Seattle, and Seattle wound up covering that number and doing so pretty comfortably, and they actually had a very good offensive performance, albeit against the Giants team that's banged up on both sides of the ball. But what I like about this spot here for Seattle is that you've got Deshaun Watson and the Texans playing their first road game since September 24th. And when you talk about taking a rookie quarterback on the road, there's no worse place to go than Seattle.
Yeah, and when it's all said and done, I think a lot of the time, especially with a young quarterback, you have him kind of rolling for a month straight, and that bye week can hurt. I know it's an extra week to technically prepare, but you lose a little bit of rhythm. And if I recall, isn't J.J. Watt injured?
Yeah, J.J. Watt's done for the year.
Right, he's out. So, I don't remember exactly what it was with his ankle, I think, but he's done. And your main concern with Seattle is generally their offensive line isn't very good, and their offense struggles moving the ball. And then you'd say, well, Houston's defensive line, great, but without Watt, that's obviously a massive hit to where that kind of X's and O's advantage would be for the Texans. So, I'm with you. I think it's Seattle or nothing. Generally this is a home field that until I think like last year when they were just more down as a team, was probably the top place outside of Denver, as far as the actual value points-wise to home field, or just what teams and players would say and coaches would say is the toughest place to actually play. And like you said, you have a Deshaun Watson rookie, going in there for their first road game in a long time. I like it. I think Seattle's one of the ones where I'll be using, and I bet him last week. I didn't use him in the contest because he had moved down like 2.5, 3 points, because I think it was 5.5 in the contest, and I was like, oh, that's crazy to lay 5.5. But I kind of wanted to play against everyone that was betting the Giants, and they dominated the game. The only reason the Giants even scored was a fumble. That I think they got the ball in the 15 and scored. They got 15 yards and scored a touchdown. Otherwise, it's a shutout. So Seattle played so strong. I like the play. Definitely, it's probably going to be one of my fourth or fifth slots that I'm using. So I know you moved it down. You said from picks to lean. But I think it's one that's your best, at least that I like within your lean set so far.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I like about it, too. And for Deshaun Watson here, I mean, obviously you can kind of put an asterisk next to that game against Cincinnati on a short week on September 14th. Since then, he's played the Patriots, who back in week 3 were just a train wreck of a defense. The Titans, that was a game where the Titans turned the football over 5 times. Houston had a couple of non-offensive touchdowns, ran up 57 in that game. The Kansas City Chiefs, now that 42-34 game on Sunday night, I don't know if people realize how bad this Chiefs defense has been. They're giving up 6 yards per play this year. And then the Browns, of course, we all know what the Browns are, and they have plenty of problems of their own. They can't really defend the pass. So in the 4 games that Watson has started since that Thursday night game, he has not played a very good defense. And what do we know about Seattle? Their defense is really good, and their secondary is outstanding. So I think this is a spot where Deshaun Watson kind of gets that reality check. And I like what you brought up about the bye week as well. And that's something that really hurt Carson Wentz last year when the Eagles started 3-0 and everyone was going, oh, this guy's awesome. And then the rest of the year, he looked really, really pedestrian. Now, clearly this year he's playing very well, but that was one of those spots last year to illustrate the point that you made about young quarterbacks in bye weeks. So, as we're kind of talking through this here, it certainly looks like the Seahawks are going to be the side for me. And I'll be curious to see, what the pick counts look like for this game, because you do have that Texans team off the bye and because they've played really well with Watson at the helm.
Definitely a pick that I would assume will be, it's probably not going to be one that's heavily used. And then within the people that do use it, I'd side with you. I think that more people will use Houston than Seattle.
All right, one more game on the leans list here. We'll go to Monday Night Football, and this is one that, at this point as I'm talking through here with the 2 leans I've mentioned already with the Saints and Seahawks, the Broncos are kind of falling down the list a little bit. But when I see the Broncos getting 7 against anybody, it's something I have to consider because that defense is just so good. Now, Kansas City's offense has been great, but like I mentioned, Kansas City's defense this year has given up over 6 yards per play. So they've got some problems of their own. If Denver can run the football, and that's a big if, catching 7 with them here in a game like this, I mean, it's not a bad look necessarily.
No, and it's one of those where I think similar to fading the Eagles, who are just so hot and the perception's so high, and with a bad team, Denver's not as bad, but they just have that perception now. The last 2 weeks, I think they were shut out last week. The week before, maybe 3 points. I don't think they've scored a touchdown in 2 weeks now. So I think it's a buy on Denver. As far as buy low goes, I don't know if they're necessarily selling on Kansas City. The time to do that was maybe against the Steelers when they had an inflated line. But I agree. It's definitely Denver or nothing. There's some 7.5s kind of popping up that are a little bit juiced that in the market that are going to be intriguing as far as when it comes down to a Monday night. I will say I'm surprised to see that 78% of the bets are on Denver, though. Just when we're looking at those splits and you're trying to figure out what maybe the contest, what people will use in the contest, and it's only a flat 7 in the contest, that one probably keeps me weighted because from at least the public percentage splits in the betting market right now so far this week, a lot of people back in Denver, and even though I kind of agree with the side, it's probably one I stay away from just for that reason alone.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, if I didn't like some of the other games more, and of course several of the games have that half point on them that I'm looking at as well, then that's a bigger factor for me too. If this number was 7.5, I would certainly be looking a little bit harder at Denver getting that half point. But with the 7 in play, and with some of the other games I like, on those games being Vikings, Jets, 49ers, Saints, and Seahawks, it makes my decision a little bit easier. But Sports Cheetah, you can find his work at wagertalk.com and also podcastu.vegas. Good luck in the Super Contest this week, man, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Yeah, that sounds good. Take care.